Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with my React template. We'll have to add some things to it. It's pretty bare bones. We'll end up adding in our React router version 3.0. And then we're going to end up adding in Redux. We're going to do a pretty simple example. There's some things that we're going to do that we haven't covered before, one of which is combining reducers to show you that you can have multiple reducers in your application and how that works. So let's actually get started by cloning this. Git.clone, and I'm going to call this the counter app React Redux demo. Reads very well. The counter app React Redux demo. And I'm going to do an npm install. And when I go to start this is going to be a pretty simple app, just with one file. And we'll go and we'll bring the other files into it. So this should end up building, and if we go over here and I put in npm run start dev, and we go to localhost 3000, we should see the number 42. Okay, so let's actually open up Vim, take a look at this. So right now, just as a starting point, we've got our index file, we've got our app here. Just to start, let's actually just pull this out. So things are in their own files, and call this app.js. And of course, we're going to have to import React and component from React. And we're going to have to do an export default of app. And if we go back here, we're just going to need to import app from /app. And that should end up running, and we should be in the same boat that we were before. Now, let's bring in a couple of libraries. Let's actually just start out by bringing in npm install, and this is going to be React router. Again, important that we end up using the 3.0 version. Big difference in the 4.0 version. Let's save it. And let's go back and start setting this up. So if we're going to have React router, we know that we're going to need to import router, route, hash history, index route, link from React router. Actually, I don't even think I need all these things. I don't think I'm going to need my link. I'll take this out for the moment. So I'm going to define my routes. Again, I like to put these in parentheses, and I'm going to end up mounting these routes, rendering these routes. So here are my routes, and my routes are going to be a router with a history equal to hash history.
Is there a reason why you don't use browser history?
Yeah, because my server's not set up to use it. I would end up getting errors if I use browser history, because browser history doesn't do it with the hash, and so if I reloaded my page, my server would attempt to serve pages that it couldn't serve. So we'll go over here and we'll specify that we're going to have a route. I'll give it a path of /, and my component is going to be app.
How would you add the special number, though, to that app?
How would you add the special number in terms of passing it in here?
Yeah, like your app has a property.
Right now you couldn't.
Okay.
So what we're going to do here is we'll go, and this is going to end up getting mounted. And if that's the case, then we should be sort of at the same boat we're in, but let's actually take a look. So I've got a closing tag issue. Let's go over here and look. So this is my router. This is not router. This is route. And I'm putting this in here because I know I'm going to have some child routes here. And this ends up going away here, but I still have my gray bar. Now, what I'm going to end up doing here, I'm going to want to bring in another couple of components. I'm going to keep this relatively simple. I'm going to bring in a import.
Wait, what is that warning? Create class is
Yeah, I think there must be a change in React that it's giving me some warnings. To be honest with you, I don't know. What we're going to end up doing here is we're going to end up bringing in we're going to have a counter blue from / counter blue. And we're going to have a counter red from / counter red. These are just going to have buttons in them where I can end up incrementing their values. So let's go ahead and create these. Counter red.js. These are going to be really simple here. I'm going to just import React from React. And this is going to be const. This is going to be, I'm just going to call it counter to make my life simple. This is going to be a simple component. Right now, it's just going to end up returning a button, class name of btn danger, which is a red button. And I'm going to pass in some count here, which I don't have at the moment. Closing button. And I'll say export default counter. All right. This is going to be my red counter. And I'm going to pass in here some count. And I'm also going to end up passing in here, doesn't exist yet, some increment that will actually increment on state this counter. And I'll just go over here and I'll specify that on click equals increment. So this is one where I'm not passing any value. So I could just say, hey, look, if this is a function that's coming in, just call it. Okay? When click is called, just call this function. I don't have to wrap it in anything because there's nothing that I'm passing to it. It always just is going to end up incrementing. So I've got my two counters here. I've got my one counter, excuse me. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to create a counter blue. And this will be the same thing, except this is going to be button primary because that's blue. And then these can now end up getting brought in, which I have here. And what I'll do is I'll specify that I have a route here for a path of red. Component is going to be counter red. And over here, I'm going to have blue. And my component is going to be counter blue. So none of this is all that interesting. This shouldn't end up blowing up at all. If I go to red here, I'm not going to end up seeing anything. And the reason I'm not going to end up seeing anything is one thing that I didn't do in my app is to go over here and these other components come in as this.props.children. Now if I reload red, I'll see my red button. If I do blue, I'll see my blue button. Let's create some navigation. Let's actually make this a container. And what we'll do over here, we'll put in nav. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to import nav from /nav. And I'll go over here and create this component. And again, I'm going to import React from React. And you have to do that because you have JSX here. And I'll say constant nav equals a function, simple component. Again, the parentheses there instead of the braces because this is just JSX that's going back here. It's the equivalent of doing it on one line, although I don't want to do it on one line. And I'll put a div here, another div, and we'll just put in 2 links. Now, since I'm going to need links, I'll say import link from React router. In which case I'll have a link. I'll say 2, and this is going to be red. Want to do a little space here. And I'll do another link here to blue. And I'm going to need to export that. So I'm going to say export default nav. In which case, if I reload this page, I should see red and blue, and I should be able to navigate to red and blue. Not terribly interesting. Not all that much going on there. Now, once we end up doing this, now we could actually think about how we could go about creating our Redux store. The only modification that we're going to make this time around is just to show you that you can do it, is that you can have more than one reducer. You could end up combining reducers. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to end up creating my store. And in order to do that, let's go over here and npm install Redux. Save.
Don't you have to do link too?
Say it again?
Don't you have to do link too? Oh, wait, it's working, so I guess you had it in there already.
What do you mean?
Link.
Yeah, I think it's in there already. This one here?
Oh, yeah, you did.
Got it. So, yeah, usually I actually forget that. But, so this is going to be Redux. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a Redux store. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to create a store.js. And I'm going to bring in, first of all, create store from Redux. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up a reducer. And this is going to be my, I'm going to call it my counter reducer. Reducers always look the same. State, action. Make sure to return the state. I'm going to have 2 actions that I could put in here. Okay? So I'm going to have a switch on action.type. And I'm also going to go over here and give an initial state. And my initial state is going to be red, 0, blue, 0. These are going to be the counts. And what I'll end up doing here is I'll have 2 actions. I'll do a case for increment red. And when I go to increment red, I'm going to change the state. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take object, assign, get a brand new shiny object, take whatever the state was, and then I'm going to say red is state.red, which will have a value, plus 1. 1, 2, buckle the shoe. Right? Now I go here. This is going to be blue. And we'll do state blue. And so this is going to be our reducer. And what we can end up doing here is now we could create a store. Now, what I could do here is if I wanted to have more than one reducer, okay? The way that I could have more reducers is basically by combining any number of reducers and saying, hey, look, this reducer is responsible for this key in the store, this reducer is responsible for this key in the store, and so on and so forth. So how do I combine reducers? Well, Redux knows you're going to want to do this. And so it gives you a method called combine reducers. Combine reducers allows you to basically just say, I'm going to call this combined, and I'm going to combine reducers. And all I have to do here is give it an object literal. Okay? And it's basically, what do you want to call this part of your reducer in the state, and what's the name of your reducer? So I'm going to say, well, for my counter part of my store, I want to use my counter reducer. Okay? And at the end, what you end up getting is as many reducers as you want to put in here. If I had another user reducers, I could say users reducer. Okay? We just have one, but again, we do have the ability to combine these. Once I end up doing that, I could say store equals create store, and I want to use this combined reducer. I'm going to end up exporting default store. Okay? Now, I know I'm going to end up needing my store in a couple of different places. So what I'm going to end up doing here, let's start with counter red. Import store from /store. Let's just make sure that this doesn't break anything, and let's see what we got here. So here, combine reducers from unexpected token. Create store, combine reducers from Redux. Let's try to see where that is. Probably, here's my state, action.
Should it be import?
Yes, thank you. Should be. Nice work. Someone's paying attention. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is let's actually just go in and look at what our store looks like. This always helps, right? You have a store, again, you don't have to wait for your store to load because your store is always going to have what? Initial state, right? So I could go console.log store get state. And you can see that I've got a counter, and you wouldn't be surprised to see that I've got a blue and I've got a red, just to sort of beat a dead horse here. What I'm going to do here is there's a couple of other things that I want to export. This was very similar to what you saw in the practice on the checkpoint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const increment red. Okay? And this is going to be a function. And I'm going to use that syntax like I had before. All this is going to do is going to export an action for type increment red. So in and of itself, if I end up calling this function, I don't really get anything all that meaningful back, except this is what's called an action creator. It gives me a valid action. This is going to be increment red. This is going to be increment blue. And if I went over here and I said store dot subscribe console.log store get state, and I went over here and I said store.dispatch, and I called increment red. Okay, by calling it, I get the action back. If I went down here, I would see that I would have a counter, and would have a red value of 1. If I went down here and I called increment blue, I should see 2. Thank you. Vince?
We would have found that soon enough.
Yeah, right. Thanks. So here, if we go back here, we're going to see that both of these values are 1. Okay? This is the equivalent of our store. Sometimes people put the actions in separate files. Simplistic application. I got no problem. You could always separate them out later. You could put them in their own folder later. This totally works. But the one thing that I do want to do is I would like to export, and I'm going to do named exports here. And I've just been doing this. It feels a little bit more comfortable. export increment red and increment blue. And this basically says, since I'm exporting these as their names, people can end up importing them, right? So this is now what's being exported. And now what this gives me the ability to do is I'll start out with my red, counter red. Now, I've got this nice, simple component, okay? But what I want to do is I want to be able to pass in information on my store, and I want to subscribe to my store, and I can't do that with a dumb component, okay? There's nothing to subscribe to here. Dumb components just render. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to create, and I'm going to bring in component, and I'm going to create a class. Yes, thank you. Whew. Man. Vince?
I was thinking it. The class is activated.
So let's go over here, and let's actually also bring in increment red, which is going to be a function. Okay? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create this class. I'm just going to call it counter container. And this is going to extend component. And I'm going to end up exporting counter container. And we're going to go over here and we'll put in our constructor. We're going to need to do super. Okay? And what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm going to specify, hey, look, my state. Okay? My state. I'm going to have something called count. And where am I going to get that state from? I'm going to go to my store, get state. Don't forget I've got this combined reducer, so it's going to be counter red. And when I go to render, what I'm going to end up doing here, I'm going to end up returning. I'm going to be wrapping around my dumb component. And I'll pass in count is going to be this dot state dot count. And what am I going to end up doing with increment? Increment is going to be, and here I'm going to wrap this. And I'll say increment is going to be a function. And when you call increment, have the store dispatch. What do I want it to dispatch? I want it to dispatch my increment red action creator. Action creators just give us back actions. And when I call increment, then I'm going to send this in as a property. That's what I want to have happen when this ends up getting clicked. Right? So let's see what this does for us so far. Let's see if we have any errors here. So here is red. At least we see this. Clicking on this doesn't seem to do anything, but let's actually just do something real fast. Let's actually see if our value ended up changing. Let's go back to our store. And let's just put back our subscribe. And we'll do console.log store get state. So now we'll go over here. And we click on this, we'll see that our state is actually changing, but it's not, nothing's happening to the red button. And the reason why nothing is happening is that if we go back to our counter red, what we're going to find out here is that we really need to, on component did mount, we need to specify, hey, look, store, we want to subscribe to you. Okay? And in fact, when there's any change to the store, what we're going to do is we're going to say this set state. We have something called counter. Where are we getting counter from? Store, get state, counter, red. Okay? And what should happen here is that if when we click on our red, let's try this one more time. Set state, store subscribe, store.getState, counter red. Let's make sure that we are incrementing. Red does seem to be going up. Sometimes I find this is just really delayed, but that doesn't seem right. On component did mount, let's make sure we're actually making it down here. This set state, oh, we don't call it counter. We're calling it count. Come on. You're embarrassing me. This dot set state count. Let's make sure we're making it in here. Am I in my counter red? Oh, no. Counter container is being exported. Oh, it's component did mount. No, you know why? It's not on component. It's component did mount. It's always something. There we go. Okay. So let's actually, instead of having to redo this all over again, let's take this. Let's do one thing first. If I go to blue, I don't see any error messages, but let's actually do this. We're going to take this code here, yank it out, and let's do our counter blue, and let's take this out. The only difference here is that we're going to end up incrementing blue. We're going to want to have a button primary counter container. This time we're going to be getting from our state blue. When the component mounts, we're going to be looking, or excuse me, when we subscribe, we don't care about red, we want blue. Other than that, I think that that will probably end up working. Oh, thank you. Thank the Lord for you guys today. Okay. So let's go over here. And we've got blue, we've got red. We can increment blue. And we go to red, and we get that error message, right? That error message says, you got to unwind me here, right? If I end up getting pulled off the, if I'm no longer in the DOM, don't subscribe to me. So that's where we go over here. And we say this dot unsubscribe. And then when we say component, then it's will unmount. And we'll say this dot unsubscribe. And we've got that here. Let's put it over here too.
Why are you doing the unsubscribe in both places?
Well, those components are going to keep on getting.
Both places in component will mount and did mount.
Component will unmount.
Will unmount.
When it unmounts, I want to unsubscribe.
But why do you also have it in component did mount?
Well, let me let you answer it. Look at the code for a second. What am I doing in the component did mount? I'm getting that unsubscribe function. Okay? Redux is nice enough to give me an unsubscribe function that I'm setting on my object that I could then call. I'm not calling unsubscribe here. I'm just getting the function. Right. So now, if I do that, and I switch, this works, right? Now, this is all well and good. It's totally fine. In fact, let's go back over here and say, look, we're in pretty good shape here. git.add dot, and I'll say got app working. Okay? But you know what Redux allows us to do is to get rid of all of this boilerplate code. It's really what it does. It also makes it so that we don't have to actually bring the store in. And the way that it does it, and let's actually go and install it. We're going to say npm install React Redux, save. So the first thing that React Redux ends up giving us gives us something called a provider. And if we go to our main part of our app, what we could do is we could import provider from React Redux. Okay? And while I'm doing that, let me also import store from /store. Now, what this really is going to do is that this provider basically allows us to wrap around our router. And I could wrap around my router, and if I just did this, and I went to run this, it's going to tell me, hey, look, you know what, if you're using the provider from React Router, you really have to have a store. Because this is based on the fact that you're going to end up using Redux, okay? And so you have to say, the same way you have to provide a history to a router, you have to provide a store to your provider. And this is the store we're going to use. There's one store in a Redux application. I still have those other messages before, but this one will end up going away. Okay? Now, once I end up doing that, now what this really does is that it's going to make my store really available within any of the components that I want to use. But in order to do that, what I need to do is I need to go back, and we'll start out with our counter blue. And I'm literally going to go in here and comment this out. And instead of going in here and bringing in our store, the only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring in increment blue, okay? But I'm going to import a function that allows us to connect our Redux store to our DOM component, has a name called connect. And what I can end up doing here, instead of actually creating this container, I could go in here and I could call connect. I need to call it, okay? It actually returns another function, and I could pass to connect my DOM component, okay? My end goal is to get the correct actions to that DOM component, okay? I want to pass properties, and I want to pass actions, okay, to that DOM component. There's two things that you can pass to connect in order to be able to do this. So there's something called, and you can name these whatever you want to, but there's something called map your store to props. Meaning map state to props. That's by default usually what it's called, or by convention, I should say. This is a function which takes the state of your store, and you can return another object. Again, I'll do it the old school way here. And what I'm going to return here is I'm going to specify that I want to have passed to this DOM component something called count. What do I want to get it from? My state, since I use the combined reducer, has a counter, and it has a value for blue. And if I go over here and I say map state to props, what'll end up happening is that when this ends up getting created, okay, when this ends up getting created, it will pass the count to this dump component from the state's counter of blue. So if I go and run this, and I go and look at blue, blue is starting out at 0. Okay? Nothing's going to happen when I do that. That's the next part. The next part is actually not map state to props, but it's saying, hey, look, are there things you want to dispatch? Okay? Are there things you want to dispatch? And this is map dispatch to props. The other one got past the state. What do you think this gets past? Dispatch. Okay? This is a function that you call, and this will dispatch something to the store. Again, I'm going to do this old school here, instead of using the parentheses. And I'm going to return. And so this is saying, what do you want to pass? And notice that I want to pass something called increment. Okay? So I give it a key of increment. Again, this just gets passed back, simple objects. I'm going to give it a key of increment. Okay? This is going to be a function. When this function ends up getting called, it's passed me the dispatch, which is automatically going to end up dispatching to the store. And I'm going to dispatch, and I ended up pulling in here, increment blue. So what will end up happening here is that not only can I map my state to props, but I could map my dispatch to props. And all that means is that on my props, I'm going to have an increment function. I'm getting it here. Here's my action creator from increment blue. And my dump component just has a method to call. And that method is going to be increment blue. And what this should do, not quite, map dispatch to props. That's probably a misspelling. Map dispatch to props. Map dispatch to props. And now, if this is my blue, I'm going to increment. So this code, where you have to go and subscribe and unsubscribe and that sort of thing, basically becomes this code. Okay? Same token. Let's do the same thing for a red component. So you could pass in whatever you want to pass in here. Foo, bar. So I'm now passing in as a prop, foo. And I'll just stick it over here. And I've got bar coming up. So again, you could pass whatever you want to. There, go ahead.
What if you want to have a smart component, like a form, where it's your own smart component? So
Then just you could connect it to a smart component. There's no law against it.
the same thing. And what if you wanted to like have?
But smart components get past props too.
So all you're doing is taking any kind of component and saying,
It's when you want to connect a component, whether it's smart or dumb. If you want to connect your component to the store, okay, and it's a Redux store, you have two choices. Either you could do it the long way and subscribe and unsubscribe, or you could use connect and not have to do that.
And it doesn't matter if it's smart or dumb.
Doesn't matter.
All right. So is this statement correct? The connect method basically takes any component and sets its properties to various aspects of your store.
That's correct.
Cool.
That's correct. So if we end up doing this, let me take this out. Let's actually do this. Let's actually say that here, let's give it some text. And we'll make this blue.
Do you want to say text?
Yes, I want to say text. So we'll go up here. And we'll do this. and we've got blue, and we've got red. Red right now is using, we're wiring this up on our own, but let's go in and go through the exercise one more time. We've got counter red, and again, we're going to comment this out. And we're going to bring in our connect method. We don't need our store. Our store is magically going to be there from our provider. We're going to import connect from React-Redux. And we'll go over here and we're going to do our connecting. So we're going to connect. Again, connect is a higher order function, and you could pass into here your DOM component. Okay? And if we end up doing that, counter container, yes, because now we don't have a counter container, we just have a counter. And now we don't really have any functionality here, so now we've got to wire things up, and we can do that by specifying map state to props. This ends up getting the state. And if I wanted to do this as a one-liner, I could always just do this. This will automatically return this object. And what do I want to have on my state? I want the count. This is my state counter. And this is going to be red. In which case, I could go over here, map state to props. Wait a second. And here's my red, of course, doesn't change. But I also have some actions that are going to be interacting with my store. And I want those const map dispatch to props. This ends up getting not the state, but some method that will end up dispatching an action. Again, we'll do this as a one-liner so we don't have to do a return. And we'll go over here. And this is going to be increment because that's what we want to get it in the store here. We can put anything we want to here. If I went over here and put in, I could ignore the dispatch and put in a function console.log hello. It's a valid function, right? If I did that, maybe not quite so valid. Let's see what it doesn't like. Dispatch is not defined. Forgot my fat arrow. So now every time I click on this, increment is a function. One would think.
You didn't put the variable down at the...
Oh, yes, thank you. Map dispatch to props. I mean, you could put those inline too, but it's kind of hard to read. So once I do that, I see this shows up, but I don't want to do that. What do I want to do? Well, yeah, I want to dispatch. What do I want to dispatch? Increment red. Increment red is a function. We call that a what? Because it creates? Right. And that's what we want to call.
What do you call it? What did you say?
Action creator.
Action creator.
And now this works as well if we wanted to do the same thing here. Text. This is going to be red. And we could go up here and make this so we've got red, we've got blue. All right, just to sort of beat a dead horse a little bit, let's just do one more of these. And what we'll end up doing here is that, let's say we want our nav to also show those updated values. Now it becomes real simple. Now we go to our nav. and we say import connect from React-Redux. In which case, instead of exporting our nav, we're going to connect and put in our nav. This wouldn't really change anything at all. Right? But what we can do here is, let's assume I'm going to go in here and I'm going to pass in red and blue. And I want to display them here, red and blue. What I can do is I can say const map state to props. This ends up taking a state. Again, we'll do the one-line thing here by just putting parentheses. This will end up getting returned. This is an object literal. The object literal, we're going to need red. Red is going to be state counter red, blue, state counter blue. And we're not going to forget to do this. So you don't have to do map dispatch to props. If not, it doesn't get used. If you wanted to do a map dispatch to props and not a map state to props, you would do null and just pass the dispatch in.
Just key and make it return state.counter.
Maybe. Let's get this to work first. So now we could do this. And could you get it to return state.counter? Maybe. Let's try it. Right?
Do we need curly brackets then, or?
Oh, yeah, just state.counter. Right? Good call. Yeah, I guess you could. So, I mean, here you could just see, again, as you do this, you're not going to want to have to write that subscribe and that unsubscribe. By the way, we haven't done anything with AJAX calls or anything like that. The only difference there is that we would put in some middleware for Redux Thunk, and we would end up dispatching, but we would end up calling functions which could do something asynchronously. But there's no reason to sort of muddy up the waters here. The goal here was to determine, and we did it, how to make these containers go away, right? So just, again, take a step back to the process. Before we ended up doing this, what do we have to do? Pass it all down, right? We had to end up passing it all down. We had to send things to components that components weren't going to end up needing, okay? Here, we could be very specific and say, this is what we want to get from the state. And that value will end up getting initialized from the state. And by the way, when the state ends up changing, it'll get those values again. And we could also say if something interesting is happening in the state and we want our store to end up changing, okay, we could end up doing that by doing the map dispatch to props. And that's React Redux. Let me stop this recording.